All right, guys, it's Alex from Dental Growth. Here with me, I have Kirk. And Kirk is from, I believe it's Seven Figure Dentist Academy. Is that correct?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, just I wanted to have Kirk on today because we've met in the past and he's doing some really cool stuff helping dental practices become more efficient, increase production, and all that good stuff. So, without further ado, Kirk, would you be able to share a little bit about your background and what you do, how you help dentists?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Alex. My background is in music, ironically, like not even in dentistry. So I, um, I am not a career dentist. I am not a dentist at all. My wife is the dentist. So I get that, all the time though. So I'm not going to correct you if you want to call me doctor. I just don't drill on teeth. Um, but still, yeah, I saw this huge, really gap from doctors coming out of dental school and going into business or trying to get into practice ownership. When my wife 4.5 years ago was like, "Hey," she was an associate at the time, out for a couple years, and she's like, "The only way I can pay off this $500,000 quickly is through practice ownership and autonomy to be able to do the things I want to do." I'm like, "Okay, cool." She's like, "Will you help me?" It's like, "Yeah, I'm your husband. I want you to be happy. I've owned businesses before in the music industry, so how can I help you um, in this?" And later on, we found out basically as long as I could take everything off of her plate except for the actual drilling and clinical side, then she would be okay. So she's an amazing clinician, but the business side is arduous. It's hard. It's wearing different hats and building yourself up as a leader on top of the mental and relational and physical side of dentistry. It's very difficult for anybody. And there's very rarely a person that can do all of it well all at once. And so I just sat down and 6 months after we bought the practice, of course, we were both learning at that point because I'd never owned a dental practice, but COVID happened. So 6 months after we bought, we shut down for 2 months. And a lot of people were freaking out, trying to figure out how to get filters and all sorts of stuff. And boxes of gloves went from $16 a box to $43 a box. And you're like, how am I going to pay for this? And yet, as business owners, really, most of the time, you know what you need to do. You just don't make time to do it. And so for those 2 months, we had the time at this point. We knew what we liked and we knew what we didn't like. And so we sat down and figured out what we actually wanted with the dental field, and what we wanted with the dental practice, and tried to figure out how to do it. So we figured out those processes, created systems, and looked at our schedule, see what we wanted to do there, looked at our ideal patient, see what we wanted to do there. And when we came back at 3.5 days a week and asked the team, like, "Hey, we're not going to pay you more, but if we come back and cut out half a day, would you guys be okay with that?" And we created a bonus system to kind of supplement. And they're like, "Yeah, yeah, let's try it. Let's see what happens." And it was amazing to see the culture change completely from the team when they had just a few hours extra on a Thursday afternoon to themselves. So now essentially we're working 6 months out of the year instead of 4 or 5 days a week, every single week, only working 3.5 days a week. And then when my wife came back from maternity leave, she came back at 3 days a week. And we've been doing that and creating a seven-figure practice, really with the systems that we have. And so that's really what I teach doctors is the business side. I teach them how to create systems because as James Clear says in Atomic Habits, we don't rise through our goals, but rather we fall to our systems because a goal is just an arbitrary number. So if you don't have the system in place to actually hit that goal, you're never going to hit it. And if you do, it's by happenstance. It's not an actual reason why you hit that. So that's what I do. And that's my background.
That's awesome. And I really like that saying because it's kind of our results come about as a result of our behaviors and the things we do day in and day out. Not necessarily what we want to do, as our goal, but our actual behaviors and habits. So implementing those systems and actually following them is going to get us to that goal. So I totally agree. And as far as those systems, how long did that take you to kind of arrive on a system that was really working for you? Because it sounds like, over COVID and in the coming years, this system kind of was developed. What kind of like, shifts and learning processes did you come across along the way, and how long did that take? And how long
Sure.
have you been offering that system to other practices now?
Sure. So, um, it's always a work in progress.
Yeah.
Um, 4.5 years in, we're still making minor adjustments. We're still ever evolving and growing. And really, it comes down to having a team that you trust, that will follow you as a leader, that works as hard as you do, but also is growth oriented. So if you don't have a team that's growth oriented, that's willing to continually refine and refine and refine and get better and better and better, it's going to be difficult. So that early on was something that we changed very quickly. We let go of a couple of people that just were not going to fit that culture that we wanted.
Mm.
And it was amazing though that, the team we currently had at that time, they were waiting for that to happen. They were hoping that that would happen. They just, weren't going to tell us that we needed to do it. Right. So it's amazing when you make the right decisions, your team is waiting for you to. And when you make those decisions to better the team and better the business and the culture, they respect you more for it. And most of the time, they were thinking it themselves. They were just waiting. But those systems, back to your question, like it took us a long time, relatively, to figure it out. Now, I would say we spent a good year trying to really refine the schedule, refine the systems that we had. Like, okay, look every single month at like, okay, what's working and what's not working, and how can we adjust? And just constant refinement. And really, the proof was in the pudding when my wife went on the first maternity leave when she came back at 3 days a week. So when she went on maternity leave, we're in a rural area, so it's kind of difficult to find team members. It's kind of hard to find, especially temporary dentists, to come in and cover. So we found a doctor that we were friends with, and when my wife was in dental school, that was renovating her office for 3 weeks. We are like, hey, this is perfect timing. You can come into our office and get an income while your office is out. We have a temporary dentist. It's a win-win. But my wife was doing ten to $12,000 a day on her own. And so when we found out that she had never done more than $6,000 a day in her own practice with hygiene, we were like, oh man, this is going to be tough. Like, we don't know how this is going to work, but something is better than nothing and us just shutting down the office. So we got her in, she was there for 3 weeks, and every single day that she was at our office, she was doing $15,000 days. And we were
Wow.
like, okay, we've got something here. And she emailed me afterwards. She was like, hey, can you send me all of those processes and those systems that you have and those programs that you use and all that stuff? I'm like, yeah, here's all the scripts, like here's everything that we use, here's what we do. And now she's thriving, doing so well in her office. And I was like, man, this is just, it's too coincidental that we are doing well. Somebody else from the outside came in, wasn't doing well, and now is doing well. And so I just started helping people, asking questions and also like giving answers and people asking us questions. So I was like, man, I need to do something here. It's replicatable, it's clearly duplicatable. So last year I decided like, okay, I'm gonna start helping doctors. And so I got on Instagram, I just started putting out content, and it's just kind of snowball from there because there's this huge need. Like I said at the beginning, is like the huge need is the business side of dentistry. It's like
Hmm.
everybody knows, and you as a dental student, you're spending $500,000 learning the clinical side. That's not something I need to teach you. You can go to CE and do that, whatever, but you need to optimize and learn how to do what you do to the best of your abilities that you've already spent a ton of money on.
Yeah.
Now, you just need that small piece that needs to be complementary to what you know how to do, which is the business side. And so I was like, man, how can I just help these doctors that don't know what they don't know to just put in some very small things. Like most of the stuff I teach is not complex. It's simple stuff, but it's hard to implement sometimes if you don't have somebody who knows what they're doing to do it. And I don't, subscribe to this thing where coaches or consultants will typically come into an office and do all of that for you. I don't like that model because typically, if somebody comes in and say goes to a team training for a whole week and like gets the team on board, everybody's pumped, everybody's excited. But the missing piece is that the doctor was never leading during those meetings. It was the coach or the consultant. And what's going to happen when I leave that office? Because everybody was looking to me as the leader. Well, now they're going to look to the doctor, and if the doctor wasn't leading in that at that point, and they're not a strong leader, then everything that you just spent a ton of money on is going to go by the wayside, and you just flush it down the toilet. So what I like to do is I like to go to the source, build up the doctor as a leader, and make them coach the team on how to do it. So I coach the doctor and they coach the team. So that way, when I'm done, I'm essentially coaching myself out of a job. But when I'm done, they have a product and a business that's running and that they can confidently run on their own. So it's taken us a long time, but now that I know through trial and error how to do it, I can do it really quick with a lot of doctors.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, because you're giving them the skills to fish for life, one way to
Right.
say it. You're and I totally think that's awesome. And I'm curious, what would be some of those big levers that practices could and should implement if whatever you're okay with sharing? Because I know these are getting into your systems, but I mean, how can docs implement some things to improve?
Sure. Yeah, of course. Like I operate under just ultra transparency. If you
Mhm.
want to know anything about me, I will let you know. Um, so it doesn't bother me to give the free value because my value is the implementation either way.
Yeah.
So I want to just give it regardless. So I mean, one of the main things is figuring out your vision. Like that's the number one thing that I come in and do. I give the doctors quick wins, like low-hanging fruit that probably they don't know about that they could be doing or things they are doing and they're just not charging for it. Like little things, I give them to them that way it pays for the program in general. And then I look at their vision because if you don't have a clear vision of where you want to go and or what kind of practice you want, then you can't get your team on board. And if your team's not on board, then you're not going to have a unified front. So if you're all working in sync, then that's when things really get real fun. Because if your team's on board, they're willing to help you when you may have dropped the ball, but they can pick it up for you. And they're also proactive in ownership of the practice because they take pride in the practice because they feel like they're a part of it, not just a mercenary just there for a paycheck, clocking in and clocking out. So I would say get very clear on your vision. And that's something I help them with. That's something that I help them sell to the team because that's part of it too, is you got to be able to convey a vision that's big enough that supports the dreams of all the people on the team. So if your vision is not big enough, if your dream isn't big enough for their personal vision, for their life to fit in, then you're not going to keep them. So you got to make sure that it's big enough to hold on to really great team members. Another thing is trying to figure out what kind of patient you want. It's like a lot of people make the mistake of trying to catch them all, if I may make a Pokemon reference there. um, you know, I can't stand doctors that will open up on Fridays and Saturdays just so that way they can catch whatever person calls the office or may, I'm all for automating and delegating, but using an outside source to catch calls on the weekends where, you're not in the office. And maybe if you're a startup, like there's a time and place for that. But when you're an established office, you need to be able to be very clear about what your practice is and what it's not. Our practice does not let patients dictate our schedule. Our practice does not let patients dictate when or not we're there. So we have set hours. My wife and I are there 3 days a week, which now we're there 2 days a week because we hired an associate who's there 3.5 days a week. Um, and our hygienists are there 3.5 days a week. Our team is there. But, you know, after a while, if somebody needs a Friday, they will find somebody who's open on a Friday, and that is okay. Just because you may not get some Friday patients doesn't mean it's going to be the detriment to your business. There will be plenty of people because you create an amazing experience and because you provide an amazing quality in dentistry that will want to come to you. And this is where my unique background comes into play. Because in the music industry, you're constantly trying to create raving fans in an industry that is so subjective, in an industry where you're trying to pitch something that only you love and make them love it too. And so the way that you do that is by creating an emotional response through an experience through your live show. That's the way you do almost it, or that's the way you do it almost every time. So now coming from an industry that's so subjective to an industry that everybody needs and almost everybody wants, it's so easy because it's all about the experience and evoking an emotion. So if I can get somebody into our office that feels an amazing experience and leaves feeling that emotional response, is now going to tell every single person around them that this is like unlike any other dental practice I've ever been in. I can't tell you how many 5-star reviews we have that talk about how I have always hated the dentist. I have always hated going to the dentist. And now I will never go anywhere else. And I can't tell you how much more knowledge I have about my teeth. I was like, yeah, because we are very specific on the verbiage we use and the experience that you have when you're in the chair and also when you leave. So if you can create an amazing experience and not allow your patients to dictate your schedule, it's amazing how they respect you when you respect their time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, and I want to just retweet that because even myself as a student provider, I noticed that just having that emotional relationship and just something where you feel that sense of rapport is super valuable. And that's, of course, where you get the person wanting to come back, not just
Right.
you're a technician and you're just there to do the thing and they're gone. They want to come back and see you and they appreciate everything you're doing so much more. So
Right.
to totally agree. I guess I'm curious. You mentioned some of like the low hanging fruit, some things that
Yeah,
providers could implement. What are some kind of quick low hanging fruit that some providers
sure.
could implement, whether it be on the emotional relationship front or on the efficiency front?
Sure. Yeah. Um, don't nickel and dime people.
Yep.
Don't nickel and dime people. Like you know, when you I we don't charge for x-rays anymore. So and that's what I mean by nickel and diming people. So like, that $27 x-ray is not going to make the difference in your practice whether or not it's going to make or break you. So, obviously like we charge for x-rays. I'm not saying we don't charge for them. We charge for x-rays, but if for some reason insurance comes back and is like, "Oh yeah, we're denying that x-ray. You owe us 16 bucks." My insurance person has authority to write that off. And if anybody ever gets a bill for it, I write it off because the information in that x-ray is way more valuable than trying to collect $16 and making someone upset because they didn't have that charge initially and they weren't expecting it. So that's where we set ourselves apart a lot. So that's some low-hanging fruit right there. Just just be kind to people. Like don't nickel and dime them. Like just like this is what it is. Try to understand that the information is more valuable than the actual charge. Another thing that we do that is super low-hanging fruit is anterior PAs. A lot of people don't take upper and lower anterior PAs when their bite wings are due. Typically, your hygienist will take the bite wings, once a year, whatever, when they're due. But there's so much missed right here in the front when you don't take those anterior PAs.
Oh yeah.
Um, I'm just saying it's amazing how much we even like when we started doing it, it's like, oh wow, there's resorption right there on the anterior. Like you didn't even realize it until you took the PA there. Like, yeah, and it could look like perfectly healthy. It's amazing what you find, and you'll probably find 30 to 40% more work just by taking those anterior PAs. Plus, most insurances will cover it because most insurances cover 1 to 2 emergency exams a year. So that is covered with another PA. So even if you're, charging for it and getting paid for it, you'll probably get paid for it with insurance as well. Another thing is doing bone grafts. Figure out how to do bone grafts because being in a rural area, like we do a lot of extractions, we don't do dentures, but because nobody's ever happy with them and we like having happy people in our office. Um, but do bone grafts. Figure that out really quick because that's a super easy procedure while you're already in the socket and it's open. So like you can just simply put a bone graft in, suture, and you're good. And that adds an extra, three, four, $500 to that procedure, and a lot of insurances cover that. So bone grafting is very valuable, if especially if you're good at surgery. Like my wife loves surgery, but it's an easy procedure and it bumps that production up. And also at the end of the day, it helps the patient be healthier in that area. Even if they don't want options later on, regardless right then, they may want them after a few years anyway. So now you don't have to do it on the back end, you do it on the front end. Another thing is buildups. I'm not saying a lot of doctors will say, oh yeah, we do a buildup on every single crown. I don't believe that every single crown needs a buildup. But I do believe that you need to do it if it's warranted. So you can fall whatever side you want on that. But at the end of the day, like buildups help reinforce the tooth. So if that tooth needs reinforcement, buildups, are an extra $200 or $300. That's an extra, production onto your appointment. That is not really that big of a deal, and also helps the patient regardless. So those are a few low hanging fruits that a lot of people don't do, and that really don't take a lot extra knowledge to do it, especially those anterior PAs.
Yeah.
Man, and if you have a CBCT or a PAN, take it on every patient, regardless, like I said, if they're due for it or not. Because once again, the information is way more valuable than anything else that you can do.
Right. Yeah, no, those are great, and I'm taking notes, on all of your points. So, definitely some things that I'm considering as well in my own practice. So, I just want to jump around here a little bit again. What
Sure.
kind of team tips do you have for practice owners? We talked about vision. What other things as far as just management and different things like that? What kind of tips do you have on that side of things, if any, that come
Sure.
to mind?
So praise quickly in public, in front of people, in front of other team members, and in front of patients, especially, but rebuke quickly in private. You need to be able to nip things in the bud on the front end because if you don't and they become a larger problem, they can affect the rest of the team. And also, nobody likes constructive criticism. Even myself, like I say I like constructive criticism, but I don't like it at the time anyway, but I do appreciate it because at the end of the day, my job and my goal is to be a better person tomorrow than I was today. Well, the way I do that is by somebody telling me the things that I'm not seeing and that I could be better at. AKA, my wife does that to me every day. Okay. And I do that to her though. So praise publicly, quickly, and also rebuke privately, quickly. Also, be comfortable with getting uncomfortable and having hard conversations. Get comfortable with having tough conversations because, once again, it's not a good thing to allow things to fester in your practice. If there's a cancer in your office, I don't care if it's your best provider. You need to let them go. You need to address it. And if it doesn't get better, you need to let them go. It does not matter because that cancer is infectious and you're going to allow good team members to walk out the door if you don't take care of it first. You got to let them go. If not, get comfortable with hard conversations and having them quickly. Same thing, right? Rebuke quickly in private. If you're able to have quick conversations that are small, those difficult conversations are not as bad anyway as if it becomes a real big problem. And then you have an even harder conversation that has to be had. So try to have those difficult conversations on the front end, but then also taking extreme ownership. When you place blame whoever you're placing blame on has power. So if you're placing blame on your team has power over you. And I'm not talking about just like having power. Like that's why people, are greedy and all sorts of stuff. You're like, yeah, that is true. But take responsibility for the fact that maybe you have not given your team good resources. So this is back to leadership. Jocko Willink and Leif Babin in Extreme Ownership talk about this a lot, which is one of the books I recommend to every single person. But there are no bad teams, just bad leaders. And they have a story in there about Navy SEAL Week where they talk about how there's the boats, right? They have to drag the boats on the beach, they have to do different things. And there was this one team that was constantly ahead of the pack the whole time. And then there was that one team that was always in the back, really dragging. The leader was just yelling at the team, like, come on, we got to go. And so what they did was they switched the leaders of the best and the worst. And lo and behold, that next day, guess who was in front? The worst team all week was in the front because now they had the proper leadership to get them there. So I would argue that if your team is not motivated to do what you want, it's because you're not developing as a leader or you're not on the level that you need to be as a leader. So you need to look at your inputs. What are you listening to? What are you reading? What are you watching? Work on your inputs and your outputs will take care of themselves. But if you can develop as a leader, so that way you can take responsibility and extreme ownership of maybe my team doesn't have the right resources as to why they're not doing what I'm asking them to do, instead of saying they're never going to get it, they're always doing stuff wrong. It's like, okay, you're placing blame. You need to put the power on yourself and take ownership in the fact that maybe you haven't equipped them to the best of their ability.
That's awesome. Yeah, and that story is really powerful too. The fact that the worst team can become the best team simply by just being a better leader, that should really highlight for all of us how important it is to be a great leader, So I'm sure there's a lot to that to leadership in general. I guess what kind of main uh, other tips about leadership do you have? Obviously being quick to praise and also quick to rebuke in private, of course. Anything else as far as quick tips for leadership?
Sure. I mean, I would say read The Go-Giver.
Okay.
The Go-Giver, I've looked, I've bought it over 150 times on my Amazon for people because it's a small book, it's very quick, and it's a parable or in parable form, but it's about servant leadership. And it's about the five, traits of stratospheric success and how you should approach, how can I get people full time in what their dreams are versus how can people help me get me what I want. And as soon as I changed that mindset and shifted it to how can I help other people, then it was amazing how well my business did even before the dental practice. I made that shift, and now that we have that approach with this office, it's made all the difference to let them know, like, look, we're here for you. We're your leaders. We're your team. Okay. And we want what's best for you. Sure, like there are times where we make mistakes, but we put more deposits in than withdrawals. Okay, we try to pour into this team no matter what, even if it hurts us sometimes. So that way, if something happens and we do make a mistake, it's not as detrimental because we just keep pouring in and keep pouring in. We don't just keep taking away from the team
Gotcha.
and serving ourselves.
Gotcha. What do you recommend as far as meetings? What types of meetings? When do you do a meeting and how often?
Sure, meeting cadence is super important. That's another thing that I preach on all the time. We do one once a month, and we
Okay.
also do one-on-ones pretty frequently. So like we
Okay.
meet with every single member of the team individually. We see what they're doing well, and we ask them about adjustments they need to make and what they're focusing on
Okay.
about once a month.
Okay.
But like we had ours just yesterday for the month of March, and we're like, look, what went well last month? What can we do better? And how can we implement something to make it better? And the team's on board for that. So yeah, do it very, very frequently. Otherwise, once again, if things get out of hand, it's a lot easier to fix it when it's a small problem than it is when it's a big problem.
Yep. Yeah, just simply assessing how are things going, what went well, what can we do better, on a frequent period. That's good. Kind of jumping back over a little bit, what do you recommend as far as scheduling and kind of production type stuff, to kind of really get, from that story earlier, going from, 6K in production to 10 or 15 per day.
Yeah. That's tough to do without me showing you,
Yeah,
but I mean, you gotta focus on what's called rocks or big production, right? So figure out how much big production you can fit on a day, and then fill it with smaller production like restorations, fillings, extractions, and then do some like basically overflow with some emergencies and seats and stuff like that, non-productive stuff, assistant driven stuff. And then also have a healthy hygiene department. I can't tell you how many doctors I've come across that don't have a healthy hygiene department. And that's the reason why they're really not thriving, is because you have to have people in for regular care. It's like I just did a podcast with Dental Intel, and he was talking about how we're in the 1% of all the practices in a lot of stuff. And in the 10% of like overall, it's like it's mainly because we have the same active patient base and we really haven't increased like crazy as far as active patients, but yet our revenue is keeps going up. And that's because we keep working on the patients that we're currently serving. It's not because we have to do way more volume in order to increase that revenue. So just get really good at treatment acceptance percentage. You know, nobody likes the word sales, but at the end of the day, like it is sales. You got to be good at building rapport quickly and being able to convey something in very simple jargon, not dental jargon, in very simple language, and to be able to convey the importance of it and how they need to have that urgency themselves. But getting a good schedule too efficiently, but then also training the team on how to run that schedule efficiently. So, like, I have doctors make a list very frequently, like, what are all the things you do during the day, from writing notes to scanning patients to taking impressions, like, whatever, and figure out what you do not have to do without your license. Like, if you have to do it with your license, you have to do it. But if you don't have to do it, you need to figure out and train somebody else to do it. So you can only do the things you are licensed to do.
gotcha. Very cool. Um, what type of kind of framing and structures do you use for the case acceptance stuff? Because of course, having that urgency and really showing the problem here, if you don't get this filling or if you don't, get that root
Sure.
canal, what other types of framing do you have, or just ways to go about case acceptance?
Sure. I take the Hermosi approach, and my wife does as well, of selling the vacation, not the flight. I can't get too far into it because we don't have a ton of time. And
Right.
I could do a whole podcast on just the treatment acceptance percentage. But basically, like, you need to talk about how much more confident they're going to be, how much, like, how better they're going to be off, not about the procedure itself. And I feel like that's a lot of what doctors do. They talk about the dental side, the procedure of what it is,
Yeah.
but nobody cares about that. Only you care about that.
Right.
So you need to talk about how much better they're going to be, how much easier it's going to be for them to eat, how much, better health-wise they're going to be, and so on and so forth. So sell the vacation of them, not the flight. Don't talk about the dental procedure.
Gotcha. Well, Kirk, we're getting kind of closer to the end here. What does working with you actually look like, if a doc did want to
Sure.
see about that?
Sure. So yeah, I typically work with doctors for 6 to 12 month period. Some continue on past that month to month. But it takes time to see a change, right? Because leadership and developing leadership, training your team, it takes time to see results. But like I said, like I start with low hanging fruit that typically pays for itself. But the easiest way to go to hold me is on Instagram at Kirk Teachout, or obviously you could email me, Kirk at fourthquartercoaching.com, ivquartercoaching.com. And I'll be happy to just talk with anybody, give them some free advice, get a game plan together for them. And if they want to work, great. But if not, like I get it. Like it's not right timing, and that's okay.
Awesome. And I also know that you have an event coming up, which I wanted to hear what that kind of is like. And yeah, could you share a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm doing a free online workshop. And we're going to be talking about different things like your ideal patient. Like, what does that look like? And going more in detail on that, what your ideal schedule looks like. I've talked about the schedule, and the schedule is very important. So I'm going to be going over stuff like that. But then also your perfect morning. There's about a 15-minute thing that you can do every single morning that'll probably add about $100,000 to your bottom line every year if you just do it. So I'm going to leave you with that. And but yeah, we're going to be talking about that, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be good.
Awesome. I feel like there's so much that we kind of went over, but also so much that there is left to go over. So hopefully we can maybe do a part two or something at some point. Especially because myself, I'm the intake guy. We run ads for dental practices, help them grow and get new patients. So I'm very curious to hear more about how you guys interface with getting new patients as well, and that intake and the inflow and marketing and things like that. So there's so
Definitely.
much more that we could go over maybe in a future video. But yeah, any other points that we missed, Kirk, or anything else you want to share with the audience before we go?
Man, no, I'm just happy to be here, man. Happy to help.
Awesome. And again, guys, you can reach Kirk at Kirk Teachout on YouTube, or sorry, on Instagram, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. And well, yeah, guys, that's it. Thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll have Kirk on again soon. Definitely reach out to him on Instagram. And with that being said, we'll see you in the next one. Take care.